Okay. Good evening, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. Let me fix a couple things here before I uh, move on. Okay. So, mute this too. Excellent. Okay. We'll be talking about 1968 in a couple minutes. I'm just trying to get some final things in order before I do so. I just got a message from someone. I want to make sure that it's not serious. Uh, okay. Alrighty. So, um, welcome everybody. Um, before I get started, I guess a couple in-class announcements because I got a bunch of emails between yesterday and today, and I want to make sure I address all of them. I guess the first one, the most pressing one, is for the extra credit assignment. I know a bunch of you, I think all of you, in fact, are having problems submitting. I don't know what's causing that because on my end, it appears to be structured correctly, but for some reason it's not working and it's happening to all of you. And because the thing is due in 6 hours, I'm not going to continue going back and forth with the school. So please, if you're doing the extra credit assignment, um, please just email that to me. I am relaxing the requirements to email that to me. So um, the requirement is that you need to have attended at least one of the lectures that we did for those Zoom calls that we did, or have emailed me. Previously we have a separate arrangement, and those who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. So if you've come to at least one, um, you can email me a paper and I'll take a look at it and I'll grade it accordingly. Um, and that's gonna hopefully get done by um, uh, Sunday. My deadline for getting most of the grading done is Sunday, and that will leave me with just the final to be done. I guess second question, nice segue, is let's talk about the final. So um, I've been doing office hours a little bit more frequently in order to answer some questions about the final. But some of you still seem to have some questions on that. I've been answering your emails, but I'm getting quite a few of them, and it's making it a little bit difficult to keep track of all of them, especially because most of you are asking similar questions. So what I'm thinking about doing is uh, going live on YouTube tomorrow and taking questions and answering some questions on the subject. I think that's just an easier way to handle this. And I know some of you maybe have questions, but are scared about asking them, or um, you get the feeling like it's a dumb question and you don't want to ask it, or uh, it's a question you didn't even realize you had, that maybe you were doing something wrong and something like that. So I think that's just an easier way to go about it. Um, if that's something that works for a lot of you, again, tomorrow I'm thinking same time. And if I don't get any questions, I have a couple of history stories that I'd like to tell that I like to throw in classes periodically, but I've just never had a chance to. So I think that's what we'll do. It'll be a nice sort of end of class sort of discussion. Um, in other news, my deadline for getting the grading done, I think I mentioned this like 5 minutes ago, but ideally, that this includes the discussions. I'm going to try to get as much of the grading done by Sunday as possible. So I know I've kept the discussions open for a reason, and that is to make sure, even if you're submitting late, I'm make sure everyone gets those in. Um, so I'm going to be going through those this weekend and getting your grades in, and finishing the extra credit and the Eichmann papers. I'm almost done. I think I have like 7 total remaining. So um, those should be up sooner than Sunday. I'm thinking maybe tomorrow or Saturday, depending on how quickly I can get through them. If not, even by tonight. We'll see what happens. So that's the situation with that. In terms of class material, this is our second to last lecture. And I'm sure a lot of you are looking at your grade book, are looking at, where you stand in the class, and are debating whether or not you should take no credit. So I guess just to reiterate, when we talk about no credit in this class, this is something that has been done specifically for the semester because of the COVID outbreak. Students who are set to fail will not fail. Students will simply receive no credit. But if you are on like a borderline situation, and if you're like at let's say you're a straight A student and you have a C in this class, or you have a D or something that is not quite failing, but is not the grade that you want, and you would like to personally request, hey, please just give me a no credit and I'll try again, because no credit does not affect your GPA, unlike an F, for example. It's just no credit. That might be an option that you guys should maybe consider. And if that's something you want to do, you have until, because I will be submitting the grades by the end of next week. So around Friday, and once I submit them to the school. Just a sec. Okay. Anyway, think long and hard about whether or not this is an option that you want, and let me know what you guys decide to do. Submitting the grades by the end of next week. So I can hear myself. It's a wonderful voice, but I love to hear it. On Friday. Dahlia, maybe lower your volume a little bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
It's because I had it on YouTube, but I was installing Zoom.
It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So, final. Let's talk about the final for a sec, because I know again a lot of you have some questions, and I want to hammer them out. Some of them, at least. Things that are on my mind and stuff like that. So a formatting question. I know a couple of you had this question already, and it doesn't hurt to repeat. If you are concerned, all right. If you are concerned about the format of the final, it is not a sort of cut and dry thing where you can answer only one question or you can answer 10. Like, the format of this is entirely up to you, and I mean that, right? So when I say, hey, you can answer this so long however you want, so long as it's 10 pages, that's also in the format. So let's say, for example, you would like to answer, say, question 2, and you like it, but you don't like 10 pages writing like it. So what you could do is you could answer question 2 or question 3 in like a 5-page paper, and then answer, you don't know which one you want to do, so then you do the rest in short answer questions until you hit 10 pages. But you don't have to answer all of them. You don't have to answer, they don't all have to be the same length. I only have really one requirement, and that is you hit 10 full pages. I guess a secondary requirement is that if you could please include the questions as you're answering it. So a lot of questions cover similar topics, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing on whether or not you're answering a question for like week 11 or you're answering the question for week 12 or 13. So please just copy paste the question in bold before answering the question. And Adeshta wants to know if it's double spaced. Yes, it is. No, 10-page single spaced. Number one, I don't want to do that to myself. Number two, I don't want to do that to you. No, double spaced. Don't mess with the margins, please. I literally just download it and set it to default margins anyway. So yes. times. Okay, yes. I guess on the emails. I checked it today. I'm getting an average of 20 to 30 emails per day, and I'm trying to keep track of all of them. The problem is that a lot of you seem to email me also all at once, and sometimes a couple emails slip through the cracks. I'm sorry if that happens. So trying to think what else I need to cover. I think that's it. I think that's all the administrative stuff that needs to be covered. Again, I will likely be going live again tomorrow for an office hours, again, discussing the final. So if you're having questions and you see me live, my recommendation is, especially if you're using YouTube as a platform, is to subscribe. And I'm going to sound like every annoying YouTuber ever. I know I'm Floor Gang at the moment, but I'm not sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. But hit the bell as well so that when I go live, it'll actually buzz you. I thought it did that automatically, but for some reason it doesn't. So that should be helpful. At least you can watch it on your phone, watch it wherever you want, and we'll be talking about the final again. So I hope that that's helpful. I hope that covered a lot of questions you might be having. I guess on that note, let's jump right into the lecture. I think I covered everything. Yes. So let's talk about 1968. This is going to be a bit of a unique lecture in that where our other lectures have talked sort of larger processes over the course of many years, decades, and sometimes even a couple of centuries, this is going to be a very unique lecture in that it covers a single year of modern history, because 1968 is a year like no other. It is a year of protest, and it is perhaps, of all of the crisis flashpoints, it appears to be the year where we come the closest to watching the burdens of the Cold War cause a societal collapse. 1968 is perhaps not coincidentally considered by many to be the worst year of modern history. Now, I want to, being the pretentious person that I am, I wanted to start today's lecture with a quote. And those of you who are attending the extra credit lectures were, sort of aware of my quoting on this. But today's lecture is going to focus a lot on Lyndon Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson, his journalist Robert Caro, who is the foremost sort of biographer and person who has really looked into the personality of Lyndon Johnson, Pulitzer Prize winner for this work. In discussing Johnson, has a rather unique take on the nature of power, because we are often taught, his words, we're all taught Lord Acton's axiom that all power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. I believed that when I started writing these books, but I don't believe it's always true anymore. What I now believe is always true about power is that power always reveals. When you have enough power to do what you always wanted to do, then you see what the guy always wanted to do. And the takeaway from that is, think about the nature of power, that absolute power, and think about what you would do if you had that power. Maybe some of you would, cure world hunger, or you would jump right into fixing the problems of the world. Maybe that's true for a lot of you, but I can guarantee, I will put my hand in the fire, guarantee that a lot of you will use that power for selfish reasons. All right, you will get rich. You will get back at that boy, that boy or girl that turned you down for prom in high school. You will reveal things about yourself in using that absolute power. Power reveals. Now, think at the start of Bruce Almighty, right? You've achieved godlike power. Like, yeah, you could use it for wonderful things, but for the most part, you're going to use it to like clear traffic as you're driving, and if that's not a solid reason to restart Bruce Almighty, nothing is. But the point that Caro is trying to make in talking about Johnson is that we don't have that kind of absolute power in the world. But what we do have, something that is at least the most similar thing that we have to that kind of power, is the power of the presidency. And so what presidents do with the power of the presidency is revealing of the kind of person that they are. I haven't taught American government in quite a bit, but when I do, when I talk about American government, what I say is that the power of the president is largely determined by the actions of the president. That presidents make of their position what they think their power should be, right? Which is why presidents interpret their power so differently. It's why the country seems to turn on its head every time we get a new president, because the way that president interprets their power is different, right? And power reveals a lot about them in the way they use it. And more than anything, power revealed, the power Johnson held revealed a lot about Johnson. I'm going to have to pause this Zoom call for a minute. I hope you guys don't mind. Bit of a thing here. So I am going to, just a sec, stop video. Oh, I am very sorry about that, you guys. Let me see. Video should be back on. Okay. So before we get into 1968, I wanted to quickly recap our last class, because it's sort of important to understand what's happening in 1968, as there's a lot of overlap between the two lectures. So as we said, why do we get involved in Vietnam? What's the reasons for the Vietnam War? And we said that it's largely motivated by bipolarity and the domino theory. This idea that if we don't halt stop the spread of communism in South Vietnam, that the rest of Southeast Asia will fall to communism. And in so doing, that will lead to countries like India and the Philippines, which are not quite Southeast Asia, but fall into communism as well. And this would lead to an insurmountable advantage that the Soviet bloc would have over the Western bloc. All right, that if the Soviet Union has in its sphere of influence, if communism has in its sphere of influence the largest country in the world and the two largest population centers in the world, that this would shift the balance of power in a way that could not just be made up by building more nukes towards one side. And this would lead to war under the rules of bipolarity. We also said that the Vietnam War is perhaps longer than we realize. It starts under Eisenhower in the late 50s, and it ends under Richard Nixon in 1971. However, the war reaches its peak under the presidency of Lyndon Johnson, and no year more so than 1968. Johnson refuses to be the president to lose Vietnam. And this is in part because he feels like he owes it to Kennedy, owes it to the dead president that he followed, to not lose the war that Kennedy championed. The problem is, as we saw last time, what is victory in Vietnam? What does victory look like? What does victory feel like? These things aren't clear. These things aren't obvious. And because of that, Johnson, decides that if he's going to win the war, he's going to have to throw men at the problem. And that's sort of what he does. This, of course, leads to widespread protests all over the United States. To give you a sense of what the year is like, on January 1st of 1968, Las Vegas, Nevada, stuntman Evel Knievel gets on his motorcycle for the last time. And on live television, there's a reason why now live television has a 7-second delay. This is why. Because the stuntman gets on his bike, jumps through a ring of fire, and misses his landing, and breaks his neck on live television. This is day one of 1968. And all through January and February, the casualties of the war begin to become more problematic. We are no longer talking about hundreds of dead. We are talking about thousands of dead, tens of thousands of dead. And 1968 is shaping up, by the time Johnson becomes the president, to be both America's longest war and one of America's bloodiest wars. Fought by an unwilling generation. Because again, as we talked about, the generation that fights in Vietnam is not representative of America as a whole. The America that fights in Vietnam tends to be more of color, tends to be younger, tends to be poorer in a way that is not always clear to the Americans at home until they see it with their own eyes. We talked about the impact of television. One thing that 1968 also reveals is the impact of civil rights. We talked about how in Vietnam, civil rights and the Vietnam War are like this. They're joined at the hip because the civil rights leaders that we are familiar with really get national profiles because of their advocacy against the Vietnam War. That also begins to spur their civil rights platform. Which is why in March of 1968, it appears that this movement, in spite of the gains that it gets, will boil over, because in March of 1968, Dr. King, is shot and killed. And we often forget this. We often think that, Dr. King had a heart attack and he died peacefully in his bed. That is not the case. Dr. King is assassinated. And this sort of reveals how fragile the race relations were in a post-civil rights era, how fragile to some extent they still are. Because the day after Dr. King is shot, riots explode all over America. Now, true story. As a graduate student, I attended Rutgers Newark, and Raymond Boulevard. Those of you who don't know where Raymond Boulevard is, it's that large throughway in the middle of downtown Newark that connects the train station to the university area, and if you keep following, it'll take you all the way out to the Oranges. There is a reason why many of the buildings along Raymond Boulevard are new. That reason is, the area around the Prudential Building. You may be wondering, wow, a lot of these buildings are brand new. This is rather odd for a historic center of a major city. Compare that to the area of New York City and Manhattan, like the Village, which does not have New York skyscrapers, and instead it has New York's sort of more brownstones and more historic buildings. And you might be asking why. Well, because the day after Dr. King is shot, America burns, and one of those cities is Newark, New Jersey. One of my professors in graduate school was himself your age when this happened, and he told us the story about how he had undergraduate housing overlooking Raymond Boulevard. And that night he looks out of his window and it looks like a giant meteor has crashed into the middle of downtown Newark, because all of the buildings were on fire and their windows were burnt, were broken through, and you could see fire on the inside. It's hard to describe what this looks like. You can still see some of the pictures from when this happened. But if it appears that 1968 is this moment in which you see all of these social tensions in America start to boil over, student movement, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, let it be said that similar things were happening in the Soviet bloc. You see, for example, here, the Prague Spring. Now, what is the Prague Spring? Same, I believe, April of 1968. You seem to have similar generationally led protests in the Soviet Union. Because remember what the promise of the hard line is, the Stalinist sort of mentality of how communism should work. The idea is, if you work now, if you suffer in the present, the lives of your children will be materially better than yours. That if suffering in the present will lead to strength for our children and for our grandchildren. And so you have a generation that lives through that. And then their children come of age, and the similar promise is made. Suffer now, but the lives of your children will be materially better because of the work you have done. We are now entering the third generation following this mentality. Khrushchev has left. We're now in the period of Leonid Brezhnev. And yet, you have young children being told the same, well, not young children anymore, they're our age, being told the same thing, that if you work hard, your children will live materially better lives. But this is not believed anymore. And I think what needs to be emphasized here is that this is not the protests of the 1980s, 1990s, that, maybe if you have Eastern European parents or Polish parents, they will be familiar with. These are not anti-communist protests. The young people that take to the streets in Prague, especially, Prague is in the Czech Republic at the time. Czechoslovakia at the time. There is no Czech Republic yet. They're not anti-communist. These are avowed communists that are protesting communism. And what they're asking for, according to the leader of the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia at the time, Alexander Dubček, is communism with a human face. They are tired of this machine, logical, darkness at noon style communism that leaves bodies in the river of history, to use their language. They want communism with a human face, a kinder communism, a fairer communism, a communism that does not emphasize productivity over all other aspects of mankind, something that is perhaps closer to the communism that Marx was describing. In that pamphlet, we looked all the way back when we talked about the Industrial Revolution. This, however, could not stand, especially because similar protests happen in Hungary as well, in an event called the advent of goulash communism in Hungary, goulash being the national cuisine of the Hungarians, in which they again asked for communism with a human face, a kinder communism. And I also don't think that it is a coincidence that both Hungary and Czechoslovakia are countries that are closest to the Western Bloc, right? You see similar sort of resentments begin to bubble up in East Germany. However, East Germany was a lot more critical to the security of the Western Bloc. It was considered a lot more of a national security focused location, and so there was a lot more security focus in that area. So there was a lot less open protest. This leads to the implementation of the Brezhnev Doctrine, which, yes, okay, here we go. So let's recap the causes of these protests. In the United States, it is mainly the escalation of the Vietnam War. This includes, by the way, high-profile losses. One such loss is that of the Tet Offensive. What's the Tet Offensive? Well, while all of, Johnson is getting on TV and saying, oh, the war is going great. Look how many more Vietnamese we're killing compared to the Americans. The Tet Offensive is not so much a military disaster, but a PR nightmare, because it is a targeted attack of US embassies in the heart of Saigon by committed Viet Cong guerrillas. Now, militarily speaking, the Tet Offensive is an absolute failure for the Viet Cong, because they lose all their fighters. They don't get anything of value. They don't get any holdings. They don't win anything. They lose a lot of men and gain nothing. But from a public relations perspective, think about what the United States is saying. The United States is saying, oh, the war is going great. Yes, we have them on the run. We're going to win in Vietnam. It's any day now. Oh, and then suddenly the Viet Cong are attacking in Saigon. Saigon is not on the border. Saigon is hundreds of miles, thousands of miles even, from the border between the North and the South. If the Viet Cong have the ability to attack American embassies in the heart of Saigon, they can hit America anywhere, which means the United States is not winning the war. By all accounts, they're losing the war. At least that's the mentality. And so Americans, especially those that have lost kids, bear in mind, we're not talking about their parents, that have lost kids, are like, wait a minute, if we're losing the war, then why are we continuing to send our children to go fight in Vietnam? Pair that with the assassination of Dr. King, and what you get is a hotbed of a political climate. And in that hotbed of a political climate, what do you get? You get, for the first time in modern American history, a truly competitive primary of an unpopular president by people from within his own party. The biggest political taboo. Why? It is widely understood that you are not supposed to primary a president of your own party. You're just not supposed to do that. It's considered political suicide. Think about it. Not to compare it too much to current events. However, there were Republicans that were primarying President Trump on the Republican ticket. I challenge you to name one. I bet you can't. Or if you can, you're probably a political junkie. I challenge you that the average American did not even know that a Republican primary was happening side by side with the Democratic one. Now imagine that if those primaries were actually competitive. Think about what that means. In 1968, that's kind of what happens. It starts with Senator Gene McCarthy. Gene McCarthy is a senator And he goes to New Hampshire and Iowa, and he runs on a single message. He says, look, I am a protest candidate. When you vote for me, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the White House, and on day one, I'm going to say, I am going to pull out of Vietnam War, and then I'm going to resign. Vote for me. Now, McCarthy doesn't win in New Hampshire, but McCarthy gets 40% of the vote in New Hampshire. Not among New Hampshire residents, among Democrats in New Hampshire. What does that mean for Johnson? That means that if Johnson can only poll about 2/3 of, under 2/3 of his own base to vote for him, well, then he's screwed. And there's blood in the water. And sensing an opportunity, the real slap in the face for Johnson is Bobby Kennedy, JFK's brother. Now, JFK's brother, Bobby Kennedy, had served as the Attorney General under Kennedy, but after his brother's death, had gone on and to run for Senate and had become a senator in the meantime. But Kennedy sees an opportunity and decides to run. And this, think about it, take it from Johnson's perspective, right? You're Lyndon Johnson. You have sacrificed political capital, your goodwill for you, your reputation, all to uphold the legacy of the president under whom you served under. And now here comes that president's brother primarying you. It is the biggest insult that Johnson could have ever gotten. Now, if you're thinking, okay, well, if Johnson is getting one segment of the vote, older people, more pro-war Democrats, more, I hate to use the word, but more quote unquote establishment Democrats on his side. And Gene McCarthy has the young, the anti-war protesters. Well, where is the avenue for Bobby Kennedy? Well, to my great shame to report this, Bobby Kennedy is perhaps the first politician in modern history to realize something rather important. And it's a shame that we have to wait to 1968 to get this. And it turns out Bobby Kennedy is right. Black people vote. And especially in an era after civil rights where all of these barriers for people of color to vote are removed. Well, Kennedy says, maybe I should go talk to these people. Maybe I should go ask what their concerns are, what I can do to materially help this constituency that as president, I'm supposed to also serve. And suddenly, out of nowhere, out of left field, Kennedy takes the spotlight, partially because he's a Kennedy. Let's call it how it is, right? Gene McCarthy is not often remembered. Bobby Kennedy is remembered. But similarly, in the East, you also have these protests, right? You have in Czechoslovakia, the protests over the hardline economics that had worsened under the chairmanship of Leonid Brezhnev. But also in Poland, you have the first student protests against worsening economic situations, especially in the main urban centers like Warsaw, but also cities like Lublin and Gdansk that have strong labor and student movements. Start to see major protests. But also in Hungary, it's not included here, but also in Hungary with goulash communism. And this leads to the formation of the Brezhnev Doctrine. And it sort of shows, in spite of the similarities of the protests, the difference in how dealing with protests is shown. Because the Brezhnev Doctrine says that if a socialist country in the Warsaw Pact begins to slip towards capitalism, it is the duty of all of the other socialist countries to intervene and save them from such ideological fallacies. Now read between the lines. What's that saying? What it's saying is, if you, like Czechoslovakia, begin to slip towards capitalism, we will intervene militarily to stop that. And that's what happens. In Czechoslovakia, in Prague, the tanks are sent. right? It's like Tiananmen Square 30 years before it happens, only you've never heard of this. Or if you have, probably because you have parents from that area or grandparents from that area that have told you these stories. But yes, the tanks are sent. Now, before we get high and mighty and say, oh, well, you know, in the United States, we didn't do that. I urge you to Google Kent State shooting and look how the United States treated some via anti-war protesters. Doesn't mean that happens in every case, and there's no similarities. Not a ton of similarities, but there are some. And if you want an analogy for what this is showing, is that it looks like the end of the Cold War is going to be brought about not by the United States and Soviet Union fighting each other, but the United States and Soviet Union fighting themselves. It's, if you want an analogy, it's imagine that in order to win the Cold War, these two sides have to build competing Jenga towers with infinite blocks. And they keep building these Jenga towers, and they get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. But it gets to the point that these Jenga towers, that the strains that building these Jenga towers so high is putting, is that they're starting to sway and buckle under their own weight. That the stresses that the Cold War is putting on these two societies are causing them to crack from within. This is sort of the paradox of the Cold War, because we assume that if the Cold War is going to end, it's going to be in one sort of like massive conflagration, the way we were worried about in our first Cold War class, where, you know, the specter of nuclear holocaust and things like the Cuban Missile Crisis are real, and I don't want to minimize those. But the closest the Cold War comes to ending and causing destruction and collapse of society is 1968, not because the US and the USSR are fighting each other, but because they're collapsing under the weight of the Cold War. And these protests are becoming stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And the example that again, let's look at the shooting of Dr. King and how America goes up into flames. You have the Army of the United States posted, forming barricades around the Capitol of the United States, the White House of the United States, because they're worried that mobs of people are going to storm the Capitol and storm the White House and kill the president or kill members of Congress over this. Think about that for a minute, right? Never in our history have we gotten that close, unless it was the War of 1812 and the Civil War. Think about that. That's crazy. But in all of this conflagration, there's a wonderful story about Bobby Kennedy. Because Bobby Kennedy, on that night, the night that Dr. King is shot, is set to go to Indianapolis. And for lack of a better word, he's set to go into the inner city. He's set to go into the ghetto, for lack of a better word, right? He's going into a heavily impoverished, predominantly African-American area of Indianapolis. And, you know, because that's his base, right? That's who he's running for. He's trying to rally people to go out and vote for him. But of course, this is an era pre-internet. This is an era pre-social media. And a lot of the people at that rally that had been waiting hours for Senator Kennedy to show up had no idea that Dr. King had died. Like, one thing I've learned by teaching classes regularly is that there is an easy way to find out when something truly bad has happened. And that is that in your class, everyone's phone goes off at once because you all get the same news alert, right? It's easy for us to stay in the know, perhaps maybe even too easy for us to get these anxiety driving notifications. At the time, not so much. And so Kennedy's advisors, as he's about to take the stage, approach him and say, hey man, don't go to this rally. Because if these people find out that Dr. King is dead, you, the whitest man in America, should perhaps not be the one to comfort them in this time. And, you know, the local police sheriff says, hey, you know, again, there's security risk for you personally. Kennedy says, no, I'm going to go anyway. And, you know, they have taken down the stage at this point. So what he does is he gets in the back of a pickup truck in front of all of these people. And Kennedy is the one to tell this crowd of predominantly African Americans in the inner city of Indianapolis, hey, I have some sad news to share for you. Unfortunately, Dr. King was shot this evening. And he gives this eulogy, no notes, off the cuff. And he says, I'm sure many of you would like to fill your heart with rage right now. I, perhaps like no one else in America, understand your pain because I personally lost a brother in the exact same way, which is true. And instead, he recites a prayer. And of all of the cities in America that experienced violence, Indianapolis was the only one that did not. And there's a story that political scientists love to tell. It's one of those myths about American politics. And this makes Kennedy a sort of cult figure in national politics. And going to the elections, going to the wire. And now suddenly, Johnson's out of the race. Remember, May, Johnson pulls out. Johnson says, I'm not going to look for the nomination of my party. He's replaced on the ballot by Hubert H. Humphrey, his vice president. And Humphrey, pulls on the same base. And they get to sunny California. Humphrey is a non-factor. Distant third place. It's neck and neck between Gene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy going to California. And Kennedy wins California. And it's looking like Kennedy's going to be the nominee. Kennedy has the most delegates. He has a mandate. Him and Gene McCarthy are running on similar issues. They both want to exit Vietnam. It's looking like this is done and dusted. Kennedy's going to be the next Democratic nominee. And at his victory party in 1968, when he's giving his victory speech, as soon as he gets off, Bobby Kennedy is shot and killed. This is the last picture we have of Kennedy alive. By who, you may ask? Well, one of the things that we don't talk about a lot in these classes is how random history can be sometimes. Because you might think, okay, Kennedy's assassinated. Well, what was he running on? And someone who probably opposed that. Maybe he was shot by a white nationalist. Maybe he was shot by a super gung-ho militarist that did not want the Vietnam War to end. Well, you would be wrong. Kennedy is shot by a Palestinian activist who is angry about the Kennedy family as a whole, their support for the state of Israel. Because in all of this, there's not a world history class, but through all of this, bear in mind what's going on in the Middle East. Things like the Yom Kippur War have happened. Rising tension between Israel and Middle Eastern powers. And the Kennedy family was supporting the state of Israel, and so he's shot for this. Even though he personally doesn't really have an opinion on the matter, to my knowledge. History is random sometimes. And so the Democratic Party descends on the city of Chicago. And in the city of Chicago, they have to decide on a nominee. Now, your first gut reaction would be to say, okay, well, if Kennedy is dead, and ideologically, the closest guy to him is Gene McCarthy, well, it's going to be Gene McCarthy, right? Wrong. Because everyone and their mother sees blood in the water. And so all of these senators come out of the woodwork and say, who would make a good president? Me. Vote for me. Hey, delegates at the Democratic Party, at the Democratic Convention, who can now vote for anyone they want. Would you like to vote for me instead? I'm a cool guy. And so they all descend. But also descending on the city of Chicago are all of the protesters that we've been talking about, right? Civil rights protesters who now saw their champion shot and killed again. You have anti-war protesters who think that their boy, Gene McCarthy, is going to get shafted, and they have the right impression. The students' rights activists descend on Chicago, and they have this sort of grand alliance. The city of Chicago, the mayor of the city of Chicago, a staunch Hubert Humphrey supporter, refuses to give them a permit and says that if you come to protest the city of Chicago, we will set the police on you. Of course, if you know anything about protesters, that rarely works, and it did not work. And so these protesters, they descend on the city of Chicago. No permits are given. And what do they find? The police state. This sort of police blockade. This is what leads Walter Cronkite, again, the most trusted voice in America in 1968, to get on the news and remark, a democratic convention in a democratic country is taking place in a police state. There is no other way to say it. This is the most trusted man in America saying this about the Democratic Party. It gives you a sense of how this election is going to go. And at the convention, you have this sort of weird thing going on because the convention doors are closed now. It's only delegates inside. People from outside are not allowed in for security reasons. But there are journalists in there. And journalists have these itty bitty TV screens. And they're watching the protests on the outside clash with the police. And it's not clear how it starts. But as the protesters on the outside are clashing with the police, harsh words are said on the inside. And those harsh words become punches. And soon, the violence on the outside is matched by the violence on the inside. There's a pretty famous video, if you're ever curious, of Dan Rather, the famous journalist for CBS, getting completely decked by a random punch by someone, just like completely to the jaw, floored by just some angry delegate at the convention. And so, lo and behold, Democratic Convention of 1968. Who will emerge as the nominee? Hubert H. Humphrey, the guy who won no states, the guy who is not running until Johnson decided to pull out. Suddenly, this guy who had not won anywhere is the Democratic nominee. The guy who was promising nothing different. And perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of the people, especially those who supported Kennedy, who thought, "Oh, well, my guy is dead, and the guy who's the nominee is running for everything against everything he stood for, is now the nominee. I'm not going to vote for that guy. I'm going to stay home." A lot of young people stay home. A lot of anti-war people, especially, stay home because they say, "Well, Humphrey's against the war, and the Republican guy Humphrey's for the war, and the Republican guy's for the war." And so, in one of the closest elections in recent memory, topped only by 2016, Richard Muriel Nixon becomes the next president. And that is because we're missing something rather important in all of this, which is, yes, young people oppose the war, but young people don't always decide elections. Many, many older people decide elections. And if young people don't turn out to vote, those older people decide to vote. And those older people, by and large, went for Nixon. Because here's what Nixon ran on. "I'm Mr. Law and Order. You see all these protesters in the streets? I'm going to return to a time when that didn't happen. They want to protest on my watch, I'll throw them in prison. There is nothing wrong in America. Everything's right in America." This is what he's running on. He's running on the good old days. And the good old days sell. And this is how 1968 ends. Now, remember what I said about power revealing. Well, Caro notes something interesting towards the end of his books. And he talks about a young lawyer practicing in California in the late 1940s and early 1950s. A young lawyer reprimanded by a judge for intentionally misrepresenting his clients, for doing things that were in his own interest to drag out the trial, and thus netting him, the lawyer, more billable hours and more money. And the judge says to that young lawyer, "If it were up to me, I would have you disbarred immediately." That young lawyer is Richard Nixon. Power reveals. And just like power revealed of Johnson, his stubbornness, his ineptitude, his unwillingness to bend and see the forces that arrayed themselves against him, power also revealed for Nixon. Only for Nixon, it revealed something very different. If you give someone the power to do what they've always wanted to do, they're going to show you what they always wanted to do. Now, next week on Monday is our final lecture. I know you guys are clearly heartbroken, weeping, I'm sure. Last lecture, we're going to talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union, about the crisis of communism. And I hope you guys will join me for that. Again, to reiterate, I will be going live tomorrow at around 6 p.m. Again, same time, to take some more questions on the final, to discuss any concerns you might be having. If you're working on the extra credit, again, I ask that you email it to me ASAP. If I can't get the Canvas working, I have been fiddling with it all day and I can't get it to work. Please, please, please email it to me ASAP. Okay? I'm hoping to get a lot of the grading done by Sunday. So if you don't email it to me by tonight, it's not going to be graded. If there are no other questions, I'm going to end this here. So I see one question. Chat. What's this? Can we compare both movies for the extra credit? No. So for the extra credit, what you're trying to do is you're doing a reaction paper of one of the extra credit movies that we're watching as part of the extra credit class. This is not the movies that we watched in class. Those have their own discussion sections. And again, to be part of the extra credit, you are required to have attended at least one of the extra credit lectures, or have a special arrangement that we made either via email or other alternative. And students that did that know who they are. So no, not for Max or for Jojo Rabbit. All right. So if there are no more questions, I will see you guys tomorrow, same time. Enjoy your evening, everybody. And if I don't see you, you have a good weekend. Bye.